a land of contradictions, where giant dinosaurs shrank in size, and flying reptiles became the dominant hunters on land. Before we begin, leave your location in the comments and journey with us into one of the strangest evolutionary experiments in Earth's history. Hatzeg, where dinosaurs became prey. Forget the familiar rules of the dinosaur world. On this island, the old laws no longer apply. Around 70 million years ago, much of Europe had been fragmented by rising sea levels. Hundreds of islands emerged across the warm waters of the Tethys Ocean. Hatzeg was one of them. Separated by vast stretches of water, this isolation changed everything. The sea became a natural barrier. Most animals could not cross it. Those that managed to reach Hatzeg were, for all practical purposes, trapped there. At first glance, Hatzeg appeared to be a land of abundance. Rivers wound across fertile floodplains. Forests covered much of the landscape. Marshes and lakes supported a rich variety of life. But abundance did not mean unlimited resources. Food, living space, everything had its limits. For large animals, this became a challenge. They required enormous amounts of food. Yet Hatzeg's resources could not support truly gigantic bodies. Over millions of years, many species began to shrink in size. This phenomenon is known as insular dwarfism. At the same time, other species discovered new opportunities. They expanded their ranges and occupied ecological niches that had been left vacant. In some groups, body size increased instead. This phenomenon is known as insular gigantism. For most of the Mesozoic era, the skies were rarely the stage for true aerial predators. They were primarily the domain of the pterosaurs. They appeared long before birds became widespread. They survived major environmental upheavals, and they spread across nearly every corner of the planet. One of the most notable examples was Darcho, the smallest Ajdarchid currently known from the island. Yet even the smallest member of this group was impressive. Its wingspan approached 3 meters, wider than that of many modern birds. Though compared to what would later appear on Hatzeg, Darcho was relatively modest in size. These were not the ocean-going fish hunters that many people imagine when they think of pterosaurs. They were something entirely different. Long legs, long necks, powerfully built bodies, and unusually large heads. Everything about Magyarosaurus suggests it was not a hunter of offshore waters. Instead, it was an efficient walker. It could travel long distances on foot, hunting across floodplains, open ground, and forest edges. On Hațeg Island, that lifestyle proved especially successful. It likely preyed upon lizards, amphibians, small mammals, and perhaps even young dinosaurs. On the ground, they looked more like storks than flying reptiles. They moved slowly through the vegetation, watching for the slightest movement, then striking with a rapid peck when prey revealed itself. Its long beak functioned like a pair of forceps, allowing it to snatch prey directly from the ground. Its height provided an excellent vantage point over the surrounding landscape. Effective as it was, Magyarosaurus wasn't the undisputed ruler of Hațeg's skies. It occupied a lower tier within the island's aerial food web, a versatile predator, taking advantage of the smaller opportunities available within Hațeg's isolated ecosystem. Further along the path of evolution came Allodaposuchus. It was first described in 2019, based on fossils discovered in Romania. With a wingspan of roughly 6 to 7 meters, Allodaposuchus was nearly twice the size of Magyarosaurus. When standing upright, it could exceed 3 meters in height, taller than most animals on the island. Allodaposuchus was capable of flight, but much of its life was probably spent on the ground. Like Magyarosaurus, it has been compared to a stork of the Cretaceous, only on a much larger scale. It did not need to remain airborne to find food. Instead, it could wander across the landscape for hours, constantly watching for movement around it. Its long legs allowed it to travel efficiently across uneven terrain. Its elongated neck lifted the head above the low vegetation, providing an excellent field of view. And its stiff, pointed beak was always ready to strike. Its skull reveals part of the story. The bones were significantly thicker than those of many other pterosaurs. Some regions were clearly reinforced, a sign of a predator that had to deal with larger prey. Prey that was harder to control, and capable of putting up a stronger fight. Its diet may have included lizards, amphibians, and primitive mammals. Its size also opened the door to other possibilities, including small ornithopods such as zalmoxes. For Allodaposuchus, opportunities like this were rare. An adult zalmoxes is focused on feeding among patches of vegetation near the water's edge, completely unaware that it is being watched. Albadraco was large enough to make most animals on Hatzeg wary. Yet even it seemed small beneath the wings of another giant. A shadow that loomed over everything, larger, more powerful, and far more formidable. Hatzegopteryx, one of the largest flying animals ever to live on Earth. When its wings were fully spread, its wingspan could reach 10 to 12 meters, nearly as wide as a light aircraft. Only Quetzalcoatlus of North America could rival it in size. But Hatzegopteryx was the heavier animal. Standing on the ground, its head could reach nearly 5 meters above the surface, comparable to a modern giraffe. With a body mass similar to that of an adult grizzly bear, supported by enormous wings, a creature like this hardly seems built for flight. Yet its takeoff strategy was unlike that of most flying animals. It did not run. It did not build up speed. Instead, it launched directly into the air. Its powerful hind limbs pushed against the ground. Its massive forelimbs acted like a catapult. In an instant, its entire body was hurled skyward. Its wings unfolded, and the sky belonged to it. Even so, flight was only how Hatzegopteryx searched for prey. The ground was where the real hunt took place. Its exceptional height allowed it to survey vast areas. Its keen eyesight could detect the slightest movement among the vegetation, even when prey attempted to remain hidden. Its most dangerous weapon was not its wings, it was its head. The skull of Hatzegopteryx measured up to 2.5 meters in length. Nearly as long as an adult horse, thick, solid, built to withstand tremendous impacts. Connected to it was a short but heavily muscled neck, a structure rarely seen among pterosaurs. Biomechanical studies suggest that Hatzegopteryx could deliver powerful downward strikes with its beak. Strong enough to bring down prey far larger than anything it could swallow whole. That made many of the island's inhabitants potential targets. Small ornithopods, young duck-billed dinosaurs, even juvenile dwarf sauropods. In the isolated world of Hatzeg, it had no true rival. A flying reptile, yet one that ruled the land. And even beneath the shadow of Hatzegopteryx, the dangers were not over. Beneath the island's rivers and wetlands, other predators were already waiting. At first glance, it might look like a modern crocodile. A long snout, powerful jaws, armor-plated skin. But it was a crocodiliform that lived in late Cretaceous Europe. Measuring only about 3 meters in length, it was much smaller than the giant crocodilians of earlier ages. The rivers and wetlands of Hatzeg provided ideal hunting grounds. Fish gathered in the shallow waters. Small animals came to drink. Young dinosaurs crossed the waterways in search of food. There, Allodaposuchus waited in ambush, letting its prey come to it. Only its eyes rose above the surface. The rest of its body remained hidden beneath the murky water. Then, without warning, it struck. A snap of powerful jaws, and the prey vanished beneath the water. Not every predator on Hatzeg came from the skies or the rivers. Beneath the island's open woodlands, another hunter was on the move. Balaur bondoc. A predator estimated to be around 1.8 to 2 meters long. Its fossils were discovered in the ancient rocks of Hatzeg, and they immediately puzzled paleontologists. At first, Balaur was described as a dromaeosaur, a close relative of the famous velociraptor. But unlike typical raptors, Balaur possessed a body unlike anything seen before. Its build was shorter and more robust. Its leg bones were unusually thick. The muscle attachment sites on its skeleton point to a remarkably powerful musculature. Everything about it suggests strength rather than speed. It was not built for long pursuits. It was built for explosive attacks at close range. Its most distinctive feature was its claws. Enlarged sickle-shaped claws were present on both the first and second toes of each foot. 4 killing claws, not 2, a structure almost unique among theropods. Their exact function remains a matter of debate. Most likely, they were used to restrain prey and inflict devastating wounds. Balaur was not the only theropod here. Megalosaurus hungaricus, a name that has existed for more than a century. The strange thing is that we know almost nothing about it. All that remains are a few fossil teeth discovered in the rocks of Hatzeg. Recent estimates suggest it was about 3 meters long. Larger than Balaur, but still relatively modest compared to many theropods from other continents. Across most of the Cretaceous world, sauropods were symbols of gigantism. On Hatzeg Island, the story was very different. The first sauropod fossils discovered here were surprisingly small, far smaller than what scientists would normally expect from a sauropod. The initial explanation seemed straightforward. Perhaps these were simply young individuals that had not yet reached adulthood. It was not until later studies that this idea was overturned. Bone histology revealed that these were not juveniles. They were fully grown adults. Their growth rings had already stabilized. Their growth rates had slowed long before. Their small size was not a stage of development. It was the defining characteristic of the entire species. The most famous example of this phenomenon was Magyarosaurus, a long-necked titanosaur, measuring only about 5 to 6 meters in length, with an estimated body mass of less than 1 ton. On other continents, a size like that would hardly have been remarkable. Among titanosaurs, however, it was tiny. A typical titanosaur often weighed between 10 and 20 tons. Some, such as Argentinosaurus, may have exceeded 60 tons. A sauropod, designed for life on an island. Its long neck was still retained. It could remain in one spot. reaching across different shrubs and patches of foliage without needing to move very much. Like its gigantic relatives, Magyarosaurus did not chew its food. Leaves and young branches were swallowed almost whole. They were then processed within its enormous digestive system. Its strategy was simple: feed constantly, digest slowly, extract as much nutrition as possible from every available food source. Its greatest defense was its size. Not many predators would choose to challenge a healthy, fully grown animal weighing hundreds of kilograms. Some fossils even suggest that Magyarosaurus carried small bony plates embedded beneath its skin. These structures are known as osteoderms. They formed a natural layer of armor across the body. Not as impressive as the armor of Ankylosaurus, but still capable of providing additional protection against attacks. The fossils of Hatzeg also reveal the presence of another titanosaur, Paludititan, a species similar in size to Magyarosaurus. Filling a comparable role was Telmatosaurus, a primitive hadrosauromorph, roughly 5 meters long, with an estimated body mass of nearly 500 kilograms. In North America, Telmatosaurus would hardly have stood out among the giant hadrosaurs. On Hatzeg, the story was different. It was one of the largest herbivores on the island. Telmatosaurus possessed jaws specially adapted for processing plants. Hundreds of small teeth were arranged in multiple layers, forming an efficient dental battery for grinding vegetation. As the outer teeth wore down from chewing branches and tough leaves, new teeth from below continuously replaced them. This process continued throughout its life, allowing Telmatosaurus to process large amounts of plant material every day. Telmatosaurus also carries one of the most unusual stories in the fossil record. Some specimens preserve evidence of amyloblastoma, a type of tumor that develops within the jawbone. In one individual, the growth became so large that it deformed part of the lower jaw, likely making feeding far more difficult. Not every animal died because of predators. Some lived with injuries and diseases for years. Even in the age of dinosaurs, illness was a part of life. Magyarosaurus, Paludititan, Telmatosaurus. They were not exceptions. They were products of the same evolutionary pressure. The giants of the mainland did not disappear. They adapted. And despite their different forms, they all served the same purpose: sustaining the ecosystem of Hatzeg. On Hatzeg, the boundaries between animal groups began to blur. Giant dinosaurs became smaller. Giant pterosaurs came to dominate the land. For most of the Mesozoic era, birds occupied the margins of the ecosystem. Many species were not even larger than a modern crow. They lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs, until a remarkable fossil appeared, Gargantuavis, one of the largest birds known from the Cretaceous period. Fossil evidence suggests it may have weighed between 130 and 140 kilograms, an exceptionally large size for a Mesozoic bird. Its leg bones were thick, its joints were robust, its body was better suited to life on the ground. Many researchers believe Gargantuavis was flightless. It may have spent its entire life walking through the forests and floodplains of Hatzeg. To this day, the skull of Gargantuavis remains a major mystery. No one knows exactly what its beak looked like. No one knows how powerful its bite may have been. And no one is certain what it ate. One hypothesis suggests that it was a herbivore or an omnivore, similar to today's large flightless birds. Another hypothesis is more ambitious. If it possessed a sufficiently large and powerful head, Gargantuavis may have been a terrestrial predator. Whatever the truth may be, Gargantuavis carries a special significance. It shows that birds were no longer confined to the edges of the ecosystem. They were beginning to occupy larger ecological roles, even before the age of mammals began. From an evolutionary perspective, birds never truly left the world of dinosaurs. They are the living descendants of the dinosaurs that survived. Hatzeg was an island, and like every island, every path eventually led to the sea. But here, the sea offered no safety. It was the domain of other predators. The highest tier of marine predation belonged to the mosasaurs, a group of giant marine reptiles that ruled the oceans of the late Cretaceous. Here, their diversity was extraordinary. Fossils indicate that at least 9 different mosasaur genera once lived in the waters surrounding Hatzeg, a level of diversity rarely seen in any marine ecosystem. Some species exceeded 9 meters in length. At the top of the food chain were giants such as Mosasaurus, Prognathodon, and Dinosaurus. They preyed on almost anything they could catch: large fish, ancient squid, sea turtles, and occasionally even pterosaurs or dinosaurs swept into the water. And of course, mosasaurs were not alone. The Tethys Sea also belonged to the sharks, and they were no less diverse. Many species reached lengths of 7 to 8 meters, built for speed and for lightning-fast attacks. Among them were relatives of Cretoxorina and other ancient mackerel sharks. They patrolled the waters around the island, hunting large fish, marine reptiles, and any food source worth pursuing. The waters around Hatzeg were especially dangerous, not only because of the number of predators, but because of the environment they inhabited. The sea here was relatively shallow, allowing giant hunters to approach remarkably close to shore. As a result, the boundary between land and ocean almost disappeared. A dinosaur stepping down to the water's edge. A pterosaur landing on the surface. Either could become a target. None of Hatzeg's creatures existed in isolation. They were connected by a complex biological network, an island food web, far smaller than those of the ancient continents, and far more fragile. At its foundation were the plants, conifer forests, fern-covered plains, and the first flowering plants, spreading across the world during the late Cretaceous. This was the original source of energy. That energy then flowed into the herbivores, the plant processing machines of Hatzeg. Unlike the vast continents, Hatzeg's herbivore layer was not made up of enormous herds. The island's space was limited, and so were its resources. Evolution chose a different solution: smaller, more efficient, less demanding of energy. Above them came the predators. Balaur bondoc patrolled the forests. Allodaposuchus waited in ambush along rivers and wetlands. They hunted smaller animals, or scavenged when the opportunity arose. None reached the size of Tyrannosaurus or Giganotosaurus, yet each remained an important link in the ecosystem. At the top of the food chain stood the giant Hatzegopteryx pterosaurs. Even so, this system was not completely closed. Beyond the island lay the Tethys Ocean, ruled by mosasaurs and large sharks. A different world, yet still connected to the island. A carcass drifting out to sea. A shoreline animal dragged beneath the water. Energy constantly moved between land and ocean. For millions of years, this web remained stable, unusual, and unlike anything else on Earth, until a global catastrophe changed everything. Chicxulub erased Hatzeg from the map of the world. Hatzeg vanished long ago, but its story still survives within the fossils it left behind. A reminder that life always finds a way to endure, even in the strangest of places. And that is what makes this island one of the most remarkable ecosystems in Earth's history. If a time portal opened right now, would Hatzeg be your first destination? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next great mysteries of the prehistoric world.